Hi, I'm Andrew Halsman. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I work at Family Tree Counseling Associates in Carmel, Indiana. If you wish to reach me, 317-457-8668 or A. Holzman, Holzman, 2 at Comcast.net. I work with individuals and couples and relationships and families and be happy to talk to you. Thank you. This video is called A Shock to the Family System. And right now, in this year, in a few months, is approaching the 50th anniversary of my dad's passing. That in itself is hard to believe, but reflecting on that, reflecting on the changes that have gone on in my life since that day, I think about lots of things. I think anyone who's had a major loss in their life, especially so young, I was only 10 years old. So at 10, my family changed. And my mom had to go back to work. My brother was off at college. That was the extent of my family. So I became a latchkey kid. I became someone who had to take care of himself. And in working with clients, death by a parent is by no means the only trauma, the only loss that people experience. Divorce at an early age, accidents to a family member that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, a long-term illness for the same reason, any sexual abuse, any kind of abuse, even things that are less intense, such as moving. Some families move a lot, and you have to get used to a whole new environment. Even the birth of a sibling. These things are shocks to the family system in some way. Some are more intense than others, of course. Mine was a big deal for me, of course, and it being a big deal because I lost my parent. I lost both parents in some ways because my mom had to go to work and was gone for hours at a time. Most of it was when I was at school, but it changed my life, and in ways that were both physical and emotional. The physical, of course, is the family changed, it reconfigured. My brother was gone. He was supportive when he was around, but really we didn't connect again for many years because he's about 10 years older than I am. So when I was 17, we connected again. But for those years, he was gone. He was living his life away at graduate school, getting married, doing different things for, to be a person, to be an adult. My mom was sad. My mom was depressed. I didn't realize this. I only realized that she would talk to me about her feelings. And as appropriate as that sounded then, it sounds inappropriate now. I felt powerful. I felt helpful. It was very invigorating in some ways to have her come and talk to me and value my opinion and value my thoughts. Here I am, 11 years old, and I'm going through my own grief and sadness, and she was more than willing to talk about it, but I didn't know how to talk about it, and no one was there to help me talk about it, really. And maybe that it wasn't the time, but she was talking about it, and she was talking about it with me and asking me my opinion and valuing my opinion, and that's how I became a budding therapist in some ways. That was important to me, to be helpful and to be useful. And I tell people that even at an early age, I was reading what would be termed self-help books. In those days, it was books, books written by psychiatrists about, cases, such as The Three Faces of Eve or The 50-Minute Hour. I can remember reading. Those books were interesting to me. They were addressing something that I needed to address, but I didn't know how to address. I drew. I like to draw, and I dealt with a lot of my feelings by drawing pictures and doing art therapy. I dealt with my feelings by masking them mostly, not talking to people. The difference that I noticed from being 10 to being 11, the difference after my dad passed away was cutting off from my friends, not running around as much, not dealing with the people who I'd grown up with in the same way, because I felt, and I think now I can understand that, but I felt embarrassed. I felt shame. I felt different. I felt unique. I knew no one who only had one parent. A simpler time. I mean, I had one friend who had divorced parents, but I knew no one who had lost a parent. And it was weird. It was a weird thing. I didn't want to feel different. I didn't want to be pitied. At the same time, I wanted someone to understand what I was going through. It wasn't an easy time, and so I shut down. And it didn't look like that to anyone who was observing me. I was happy and healthy and doing well in school, not acting out. I wasn't any problem. I just was internal. And by being internal, I kind of dealt with my feelings in that way, whether it was by drawing or by writing sometimes. And I see that in clients as well. So this is not just about me, of course. This is about when someone has any kind of trauma, any kind of loss, any kind of shock to the family system. What do they do? A lot of the time, it's really hard for people to talk about what's going on with them, and it becomes a way of life. It becomes a way of life to be there for other people, or to not be there for yourself, and to keep on going. And there's advantages to that, of course, to not shutting down and hiding. It's very important to be able to take care of yourself, and it's even nice to take care of other people. But the problem, of course, is a lot of the times in relationships. So I'll see folks who had to, at an early age, because of a parent has left, or there's divorce, or there's death, or there's some kind of change in the family system, that a person of 8 or 10 or 12 is cooking for the family, is cleaning the house, is riding herd on a bunch of siblings, is responsible for emotionally or physically things beyond their age. Just like I was not responsible too much physically, but I was responsible emotionally for my mom. And it didn't feel like that, but in some way I was. And she wasn't trying to hurt me in any way, but I was. And I felt responsible, and I worried for her. And it curtailed my ability, looking back, to go out and do things that teenagers do and have fun, because I was responsible. And if you're physically responsible, that's even more so. You're taking care of the house, you're taking care of your parent, you're taking care of the other children in the house. It changes you, and it creates in you the ability to be very responsible, which is good. And so I'll see folks who are managers and CEOs and vice presidents and presidents of companies and doing very well. They're doing very well. But relationships can be the test of that. You can have a relationship where, if you're that type of caring, loving manager, you can be seen as being intrusive or smug. You can come off in ways that push the other person away, because you know it all. You know how to handle it. You've been handling it for 20, 30 years. You've been dealing with things that kids should not have to deal with. And so the other person is feeling controlled or managed. And a lot of the times they pick the person who's going to do that because they need that, but they might also resent it. So there's all this confluence of feelings and ways of acting that can create issues in a relationship. And I see that as well. I'll see someone who's very responsible and very good in a relationship in terms of being logical and managing things, have issues in the relationship with the other person who feels beaten down or controlled. And so that doesn't get talked about, or if it does get talked about, it can get talked about in explosive ways. So that's the emotional piece of this, and the relationship piece of that. In terms of myself, when the emotions weren't addressed, and they weren't addressed for many years, I shut down and I felt alone and I cut myself off. And it took me a while to get to that place where I wanted to think about it, talk about it, cry about it, feel. And a lot of people don't get there. And that's part of what counseling is good for, is to help people get to that place where they're comfortable talking about their feelings and talking about what needs to happen. Because being a therapist is great, but you don't want to be a therapist in your life, in your day-to-day life. Excuse me. Got a cat here that's meowing for attention. So, if, as I said earlier, if my father had lived a game that I play often, my life would have been very different. And I think if you don't, there's very few people who in their life don't have some kind of trauma, some kind of shock to the system. And when you have that shock to the system, you find ways to deal with your feelings. But if you don't deal with your feelings, if you don't deal with your thoughts, if you don't deal with the psychological ramifications of what's going on, it can affect a lot of things very strongly. Luckily, I'm happy with a loving family, a good wife with good boundaries, good children who are grown. But if you're going through many relationships, or you're unhappy in your relationships, you might look into what has happened in your life, what has happened in your childhood to prevent you from possibly, because it feels normal for you, but possibly having those good relationships. It is normal, your life, it is okay, it's just impacting you. And if you're a rescuer, if you're a person who's there for other people, you might be missing, like I was, missing being able to identify what your own needs were a lot of the time. And so then you begin to resent that other people don't read your mind, and it might cause issues for you and problems in the relationship. So for the anniversary of my dad's death, I considered visiting his grave, and he's buried out on Long Island in a veteran cemetery. And I might do that, but I think more importantly, I'd like to visit my old hometown and see and experience and live some of the feelings and thoughts that I had back then. And that would be more powerful for me, because that's where I lived, and that's what I experienced, and that's who I am. And for better or for worse, my life is very good. I have, like I said, I have a lot of good things going for me, but it took some time and some work and some pain. It took a long time before I was cognizant of what was going on with me and how I was acting and how I was pushing people away. So just a little bit about me, and a little bit about this anniversary, and a little bit about what happens when you have a little bit of a shock, saying a little bit a lot, but a shock to the system. It could be a great shock to the system. Thank you for listening. I'm Andy Holzman of Family Tree Counseling Associates, 317-457-8668, or aholzman2@comcast.net. Appreciate you listening. Thank you.